In 2009, a biologist named Marc Bekoff watched something in his own driveway that would end up defining how millions of people think about bird grief. 4 magpies gathered around a dead magpie, gently pecked at its body, and one flew off, came back with a beak full of grass, and laid it beside the corpse. Then all 4 stood there in silence for several seconds before flying away. Bekoff called it a funeral. The story went viral, and it's still the single most cited piece of evidence that birds mourn their dead. It has also never been repeated, by him or by anyone else, in a controlled setting. One really striking anecdote isn't nothing, but it isn't a pattern either. So, a few years later, at the same university that ran the crow mask experiments, a graduate student named Kaeli Swift decided to actually test it. She and her advisor, the same researcher behind the mask study, placed taxidermied dead crows on the ground around Seattle and filmed how wild crows reacted. The crows did gather, loudly, sometimes dozens of them at once, circling and calling in what researchers call a cacophonous aggregation. Researchers actually have a name for it, a cacophonous aggregation, but almost none of them touched the body. None of them brought grass. What they mostly did was look at the corpse and at everything around it, then they left. And for days, sometimes weeks, they avoided that exact spot. That's not a funeral. That's a hazard survey. Nothing more mystical than that. A dead crow to a living crow is data. Something killed something here, recently, and whatever it was might still be nearby. The gathering isn't grief. It's dozens of birds cross-referencing a crime scene before deciding whether the neighborhood is still safe. Swift's team even tested this with a person standing near the body, wearing a mask. Sound familiar? And the crows learned to scold that exact mask for weeks afterward. The same threat tagging system covered earlier, just triggered by a body instead of a trap. Swift herself is careful about the word grief though. In interviews, she said the birds are clearly assessing something and quite possibly experiencing agitation or fear while they do it. But that's a different claim than mourning, and she doesn't make it. So the magpie funeral almost certainly wasn't a funeral either. It was very possibly the same behavior, just interpreted through a very human lens by someone who wanted it to be one. Which makes what elephants do a genuinely useful contrast, because it doesn't look anything like a hazard survey. Elephants that come across the bones of a dead elephant, even bones with no flesh left, no smell of blood, no danger information left to gather, will stop. They'll pick up the bones with their trunks, turn them over, and touch them for long stretches of time, sometimes returning to the same bones on multiple separate visits, years apart. One of the most cited cases involves a matriarch named Eleanor, studied for decades in Kenya's Amboseli National Park. After she collapsed and died, elephants from several different families investigated her body over the following days, not just her own relatives. There's nothing left to learn from a sun-bleached bone. It can't teach a living elephant anything about a current threat, and they linger anyway. Orcas take this further than almost any other documented animal. In 2018, a mother orca off the coast of Washington state gave birth to a calf that lived for only about half an hour. She carried its body for 17 days, across roughly 1,000 miles of open ocean, repeatedly diving to retrieve it each time it slipped from her rostrum, while her pods stayed close and took turns helping NOAA and the Center for Whale Research track the entire 17-day event. Scientists were openly worried about the mother's own health by the end of it, and the case renewed conservation attention on her population, an endangered group known as the southern resident orcas. No researcher on Earth thinks that's a hazard survey. So here's the actual, honest split. What looks like a bird funeral is almost certainly a threat assessment ritual wearing very convincing funeral clothes. What elephants and orcas do is something else. Behavior that costs energy, offers no informational payoff, and persists well past the point where any alarm response theory can explain it. None of that proves an elephant or an orca grieves the way a human does. Nobody can run that experiment. But we can't prove it cuts both ways. It also means you can't rule it out, and the behavior itself doesn't leave much else on the table, which brings us back to that driveway in 2009. Whatever those 4 magpies were actually doing, it's a decent bet it looked a lot more like a very loud, very cautious hazard meeting than a funeral, and the fact that it read as grief to the one human watching says at least as much about us as it does about them. So here's what I want to know. Have you ever watched an animal react to death? A pet? Wildlife? Anything in a way you couldn't explain? Tell me what happened. Also, there's a pigeon hidden somewhere in this video, having completely missed the point of everything happening around it, which felt appropriate. Drop the timestamp if you spot it. One random correct answer will announce next video. Every study here, Kaeli Swift's crow research, the elephant bone visiting studies, and NOAA's tracking of the 2018 orca case is linked in the description. Thanks for watching.